Great. There's a fantastic. All right. Well, as people are getting settled, we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the 2025 second annual Shoreline Contractor Workshop. My name is Barbara Heitkamp. I am a water resources educator that works here in East Central Minnesota. I'm part of a partnership called the Lower St. Croix Watershed Partnership. And so I am joined today by several of our partners. Oh, hold on. Clicky click. There we go. Joined by several of our partners in East Central Minnesota to bring you this workshop. And so the Lower St. Croix Watershed Partnership is a part of a statewide initiative called the One Watershed, One Plan. And it's about bringing together local government partners to try to do what we can to improve water quality and the generally how we manage our water and natural resources. And so that outline that you see on the map there is the entire basin. All of those partners are in the partnership. We have 5 different counties represented. We have numerous watershed districts and WMOs. And the folks who are joining me today, we have speakers from the Washington Conservation District, the Chisago Soil and Water Conservation District, the Carnelian-Marine-St. Croix Watershed District, and this is in collaboration with the East Metro Water Resource Education Program that is run by Angie Hong. If you know Angie at all, you'll probably read her. Yep, she's back there. She's does a lot of articles in the Stillwater Gazette about ongoing conservation throughout our area. And so those are the folks we're going to be hearing today. The workshop objective today, so we really just want to be able to provide information and resources to professional shoreline contractors, which are many of you here in the room, to help improve your shoreline projects, making sure that we're being able to take care of our lakes, keep the water quality high, keep the property values high, and make sure that you are being able to give your client the best product that they're looking for. And so brief agenda for the day, we're going to do welcomes. I'm actually just going to ask that as each speaker comes up that they introduce themselves. I'm going to start with a very brief, like kind of one of the reasons why we're holding these workshops, the status and the state of shorelines here in Minnesota. We're going to have Casey come up from Chisago Soil and Water to talk about shoreline basics, rules, and resources for you. And then Tom is going to jump in talking a lot about, we know a lot of folks are dealing with very significant ice heaves and ridges this year. We'll wrap up with a break. We can refresh coffee, grab some more snacks. And then Lori from the Washington Conservation District is going to be talking about what watershed district programs and potentially financial and technical resources are available to support ecological restorations. We are welcoming Michael Welch from Smith Partners this morning, an attorney that actually works with watershed districts in terms of how can we make sure that when you're out there doing your work, how do you stay out of trouble? How do you make sure that you have all the permits you need, make sure you know who to contact when you're doing your projects. And then we have some open time for Q&A at the end. And so hopefully we'll get a lot of questions, a lot of good discussion going. We know that a lot of folks out there are just really concerned about what we can do to improve our lakes and our shoreline experience here in Minnesota. So related to that, kind of going into why do we care about shoreline so much? It's because we love our Minnesota lakes. It's our tagline, right? The land of 10,000 lakes. When you're in Minnesota, you can close your eyes and think about, wow, you know, we can go to these wonderful lakes. We can go to these beaches. We can recreate. We can fish. We can see wildlife. Kids are able to swim. And so naturally, we want to live next to those lakes. And so what we've seen is continual progressive development of those shorelines across Minnesota. And so on the left, you see Little Green Lake, which is in Chisago County. And then we have an aerial photo of Forest Lake on the right. And it is just interesting to see just all of those docks protruding from the shorelines. And so obviously we want to be very close. The thing is that we're moving away more from like the classic Minnesota cabin experience, and we're bringing more of this suburban aesthetic with us, which is leading to a lot of manicured lawns, a lot of rockscaping, a lot of sand, blankets, and beaches. And there are potential impacts from that. So in a paper that was published now a couple years ago by a series of stakeholders in this group called the Minnesota Natural Shoreline Partnership, represents state agencies, watershed districts, soil and waters, nonprofits, just folks that generally are working in shoreline areas. And what they've been able to find is that nearly 50% of our Minnesota natural shorelines have disappeared. And that's because we want to live on those lakes. We are altering those shorelines, and we're continuing to see a trend of losing those shorelines on the order of 1% or 2% every decade. And so just one of the things that they were actually able to demonstrate in that report. And so the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources has something called Score Your Shore. And it's where you're able to go out and somewhat evaluate the amount of trees that you have on your shoreline, or the amount of buffers that are along shorelines, or how altered those shorelines are. And what they found for the entire state is that, generally speaking, that stewardship survey, so high being that you still have a really high quality habitats and practices that will protect lake health and water quality, generally has gone down quite a bit. So all lots across Minnesota. So we're seeing more in the moderate sort of scores, the low and very low. High is only in the 11%. If you switch to just residential lots, it shifts quite a bit, and you go from 61% moderate down to 52% low. And then here in Washington County, it's even lower. So we're just seeing this shift away from having that natural shoreline that is providing a lot of ecological benefits and helping keep our lakes resilient from pollution and maintaining high biodiversity that supports the lake ecosystem, is dropping down pretty significantly. And people see this, right? They see the fact that we get these algal blooms in the summer. They're not seeing as many turtles, frogs, otters along their shorelines. A lot of folks that contact our partners are worried about erosion. A lot of times they have turf grass all the way down to the shoreline, which doesn't have a very significant root structure to hold the soil together. And then you're dealing with cloudy water as that sediment from the shore is released into the water. And also this, from the removal of aquatic plants as well, because people want to have a nice bare lake bed. So in Minnesota, we have something called the Impaired Waters List. This is a list that's compiled by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. They refresh it every 2 years. The next update is coming in 2026. And what they do is that they're able to take water monitoring data from across the state collected by a variety of partners and be able to say, well, what are the trends? What are the metrics? And then being able to establish particular thresholds of like, well, when this lake crosses over this particular threshold, it's considered impaired. And when something is impaired, then it takes usually a lot of effort, a lot of community buy-in, and a lot of money to be able to start to reverse those trends. The ones that we see a lot in our shorelines is that people are worried about green algae. So the fact that we have a lot more nutrients going into our lakes, that we're seeing a lot more sediment making into our lakes. And then we have these unhealthy conditions for fish and bugs. And so as of right now, there's a lot of red on that screen. There is some purple. The purple is actually where things have been removed off the impaired list. So we're making close, just, it feels minuscule, but there are still great strides forward. As we continue to try to combat the things that are hurting our lakes and rivers. And so this is kind of one example I'd love to bring up at a lot of times at lake association meetings. And so when people look at the shoreline, it's quite beautiful, right? Like a lot of people would love to live on a lot that is designed just like this. You have a large house. We've kind of moved away from that cabin aesthetic. We have a permanent residence there, has a lot of impervious surface, a large footprint, generates a lot of runoff off of the house, off the roof, off the patios, and that runoff is able to go directly across the lawn. And so when we have that impervious surface, we have more stormwater runoff that then is potentially being able to go to the lake. That traditional lawn with the root structure, a lot of times you'll hear lawn referred to as green concrete. It doesn't necessarily allow a lot of infiltration of that runoff. And so then it's not going to hold it back and it's not going to filter it either. And so more of those pollutants, if you put a lot of fertilizer on your lawn, that fertilizer is going to go directly into the lake. If you have leaves, grass clippings, those can get picked up and head to the lake. The shallow grass roots also don't help stabilize the shoreline, which means that you potentially would have shore erosion. A lot of people then turn to the installation of riprap or gravel beaches. Where do you see the habitat for the frogs in the picture, right? Where do you see the habitat for the turtles? Where do you see the macroinvertebrates that help support the fish population? And the thing is that if it just were this one property, that's one thing. But the thing is because we've brought this aesthetic to this area or to these lakes, you times that by the hundreds of properties surrounding those lakes, and that's going to lead a lot to that deterioration in water quality. It's going to lead to the fact that you're going to see less and less wildlife along your shorelines. And you're going to see a lot more of these. Oh, I got a lot of people who are very concerned about Canadian geese and the poop associated with them. If you want to get rid of Canadian geese, make sure that you have tall grasses along your shoreline. They don't like not being able to see through things. So one of the things that I find really fun is when people are like, yeah, we did this shoreline restoration. We have all of this, these pretty plants, and we don't have as much geese anymore. It's wonderful. The Carnelian-Marine-St. Croix Watershed District actually did a pretty extensive shoreline inventory survey a couple years ago, kind of looking at how people are using their shoreline. And they did it for multiple of the lakes in this area. I think it was 10 lakes, correct? Okay. And so what they were able to see is that they still have some lakes that actually do have a pretty naturalized shorelines. But when you get to some of the larger lakes that a lot of people like to recreate on, Big Marine and Big Carnelian, you're seeing these huge shifts from natural shorelines to maybe some bioengineered shorelines where you have targeted placement of rock and as well as plants to help stabilize the shore. But we're moving more to that turf. We're moving more to having beaches. And there is an aesthetic look of riprap that people are really resonating with versus it being truly functional. In the aquatic zone, so moving into the water, a lot of that emergent vegetation is helping stabilize the lake bed shore, but people a lot of times I'm on a mission to de-vilify the aquatic plant because people just refer to them as weeds. But you can see again across these lakes, so some lakes have still pretty relatively decent percentages of emergent vegetation, but then when you get to some of these larger lakes, that red where you don't necessarily see any of that emergent vegetation is a potential concern. And same thing with woody habitat. People think of downed wood as being a safety hazard or ugly. We're seeing people are actually just removing those woody habitats, which is, if you like to see turtles, they need downed wood. So these naturalized shorelines, they're better able to capture and filter stormwater runoff. So it's not just reducing the amount of water going into your lake, it's actually filtering out some of those pollutants that we do not want in the lake. Generally speaking, they do not require a lot of maintenance. They do not require mowing or fertilizers. Those deep roots do a much better job of holding the shoreline together than rock alone. As well as be able to provide habitat for the pollinators, wildlife critters that support the base of the food web, and they're anti-geese, generally speaking. So in the end, it's not about, it has to be all or nothing, but it is possible to find a better balance between making sure that we're leaving a little for the lake, as well as being able to use our lakes in a recreational way that your clients are really going to enjoy. The goal that was recommended by the Minnesota Natural Shoreline Partnership in their white paper was that we have 75% of a shoreline be unmowed with natural vegetation extending 25 feet landward from the shore. There is a lot of work to move in that, and I know that my partners are going to be talking a little bit more about that in future presentations as well, about some of the goals that we have for different parts of our county. And we're just trying to move this perception that there's both beauty and function here, right? It's not necessarily something that looks weedy or unkempt. There are ways to create these buffers and do it in such a way that can be really quite beautiful. And there have been a number of programs over the past few years that have supported being able to achieve that balance. And so this is one that I love showing on Green Lake, this absolutely lush vegetative buffer, but they also still do have a little bit of shoreline. They still have their dock with their pontoon. So it is possible to have that balance. We're doing a lot of shoreline showcases throughout the basin. So folks who are electing to put these in, being able to be like, hey, come out, check out this shoreline, tell us what you think. This was a landowner that they had riprap already there, but quickly determined that it wasn't doing what they needed in order to stabilize the shore as they wanted to. So they elected to do a buffer. And they've absolutely loved it. So just being able to get together, kind of starting to change the status quo, change that perception that the aesthetic needs to be something that's highly manicured. And so we're doing a lot of outreach. You've probably picked up several flyers that are on the table back there, really trying to talk to people about what do you expect out of your shoreline and how can you make sure that your shoreline is actually supporting the lake health and supporting the things that you love so much about it, versus just being about like, well, I want to be able to use my land the way I use my land. We do offer free site visits from our soil and water conservation districts and the watershed districts. They'll talk more about that. Lori's going to talk a little bit more about some of the cost share grants that are available. And I am going to turn it over next to Casey. She's going to give us a great basics. Here are the basics. Disco ball. That would be really fun.
Okay, hi. My name's Casey Thiel. I'm from Chisago Soil and Water Conservation District. Some of you guys probably don't know what a conservation district is. A soil and water conservation district, there's one in every county in the state of Minnesota. We are a special unit of government designed to help landowners figure out how we can help their land, whether it's lake shores, farm fields, prairies, wildlife, whatever it is. Oh, hate mics. Hate mics. So, is that better? So, soil and water conservation districts are in every single county in Minnesota. And so, I'm going to say this multiple times, but when in doubt, call them. Okay. Whether they're going to direct you to the right person if they don't know the answer. So if you have a question, call Soil and Water Conservation District. In Washington, it's the Conservation District. Anoka is a Conservation District. Isani is a Soil and Water Conservation District. Every county has one, and they will help you find who you need to talk to. So some lakeshore basics. That's good things to know when you're out working on lake shores. So the lake, obviously we have the lake. We have kind of that lakeshore zone, which is along the lake edge, and then upland areas. I'm going to talk specifically about that lakeshore zone. There's a lot of things we need to know when we're out on a site visit, whether that's you as a contractor or a landowner or me as a water quality professional. Things you need to know is what is the ordinary high water level? Who has jurisdiction? And that one is even more complicated than the first one. It's not the same everywhere, but like I said, call the Soil and Water Conservation District. They'll help you figure out who that is. Vegetation zones from in the water to upland, that whole thing. Talking about when we can use riprap. And then I'll also just share some resources for you. And I think last year we sent out the presentation with those resources on there after the fact to everybody who's on there. So first thing I'll talk about is the ordinary high water level. Who knows what this is? Who actually knows what this is? Because most people don't actually know what it means. I get several calls per year that I say, okay, well, what's the ordinary high water mark? Well, it changes. Nope. Or it's different every year, or it's, I don't know the answer. Well, it is an established lake elevation in feet above sea level that delineates where we're lake bed below that ordinary high water mark, and then private property or upland area. So that elevation is set by the DNR. It never changes. It never changes. It never changes. That's something that I get questions on all the time. Well, last year it was here. No, you're thinking of kind of like an average water level. That OHW line does not change. So every single meandered lake in the state of Minnesota has what's called that ordinary high water mark. For jurisdiction below that watermark, below the ordinary high water mark, is property of the state. My property, it's your property, it's everybody's property. Above that, it's whoever has jurisdiction in that area. So below that, it's the property of the state, and the DNR is who has jurisdiction. If you want to find the ordinary high water mark of your lake or the lake you're working on, you can go to the DNR Lake Finder website. And again, these are things you can look up after the fact, or Google that, ordinary high water mark or DNR Lake Finder. That's where you find this information. So you go in there and you type in your lake and your county if you want. If you're looking up multiple lakes, you can just do it by county and it'll show you all the lakes in that county. You click lake data, then you click on your lake that shows up. So if it's specifically one lake, or you're looking at all of them, a whole list of them could pop up. You click on water levels on that left side there, and then you're going to get this page. So this page has all the data you need to know about where that ordinary high water mark is. So it's linked there. The ordinary high water level of this lake is 900.2 feet above sea level. It never changes. I'm going to say it again. It never changes. Okay, so you can look at where the water levels have been over the years. That's on this chart on the side. And if you click on those, there's even more data that goes back farther. Because everybody says they remember, oh, it's never been this high, it's never been this low, it's never been this. Well, we really only remember like 2 years, maybe 4 at the most, before we kind of blank that out and we don't know the exact thing, but you can find out anywhere on here. And then if you're a contractor and you're trying to find that line, the line at which you're in trouble or you're not in trouble, go here and it shows you a benchmark so that you can measure the exact location of that ordinary high water mark. Any questions on that? Oh, okay. So when you go out to a lakeshore site visit, you can kind of eyeball this stuff. Water levels on a lot of lakes are very static. They stay about the same. They might bounce a little bit up and down. Some of them bounce wildly. So go, way above this ordinary high. They go below this ordinary high. They never get to the ordinary high. There's all kinds of, each lake has a very different behavior as far as water levels. This lake, this is Chisago Lake, I believe. And so you can see here's the lake level. This is or lake edge. This is very often where you'll see the water on this lake. But you see all this sand right here, this like your beach. In this case, that's actually lake bed and you can't touch it. This line you can kind of pick out based on where the vegetation changes and where there are bigger trees growing. So as a visual ballpark, you can kind of see that, oh, there's big trees growing here. The water doesn't come up to this level and stay there for any kind of length of time very often. So if you see big trees, that's kind of a good edge. But the lake vegetation changing from like You see a lot of plants that look like they grow in the water to a lot of plants that look like they grow in your yard. So on this one, this I believe is North Center Lake, you can see that the level of the water is low, lower than where the ordinary high water mark is. If I was going to go out here, I would look and figure out, okay, well, there's trees here. This building back here is really old. And often those buildings before there was really good zoning rules are right at that ordinary high water mark. But you can see that that's where the ordinary high water level is on this particular lake. And again, that doesn't mean it's where the water is usually, or where the highest the water ever gets, or the lowest the water ever gets. It's a set elevation delineating the lake bed from the upland. So any other questions on ordinary high water level? I'm happy to answer them after the fact too. But so now we're going to talk about jurisdiction a little bit. And this one is complicated. Depending on what area you are in, county, township, city, watershed district, your jurisdiction is going to change. If you are below that ordinary high water mark level, or you think you might be below that ordinary high water level, call the DNR. Call the DNR before you do anything. You can call me and I can be your go-between, or you can call the watershed districts or the conservation district. We can be your go-between, but always call the DNR, because as soon as you start working in that zone where it might be below RHW and it might be above, we're going to get calls. So you might as well call on the front end. So in Chisago County, if you're within a township, that is jurisdiction of the county. So you got to call and make sure there's no permits needed at the county level. And in the cities, these are some of the cities in Chisago County that have jurisdiction: Wyoming, North Branch, Chisago City, Lindstrom, and Taylor's Falls. That means they do their own zoning. So you have to call them as well and find out their rules. In Washington County, it gets a lot more complicated because there are watershed districts on top of that, besides county, city, township. There's probably not township jurisdiction. Yeah, maybe. And the watershed districts have also probably more stringent rules than the county, than the DNR, than those blanket ordinances. So you have to know who has jurisdiction. And just because, I think that later on they're going to talk a little bit more about this, there's kind of a lot of places where they overlap. And just because one person says, nope, you don't need a permit here, that's what they're talking about for themselves. That doesn't mean the next person that you go to, the next jurisdiction, doesn't have those shoreline rules or permits needed. So you have to make sure where you are. This can help you get to the right jurisdiction in Washington County. And again, all of this information will be sent out after the fact, so you can review it and find out who you actually need to call. So the next thing is kind of what are different vegetation zones. Barbara talked a little bit about this. And this is how it, kind of progresses over from in the water. We have, big open water. If you're on a big lake, you have open water where there isn't any vegetation that you can see. It's all on the bottom. And then the next area up is where we have emergent and floating leaf vegetation. That's where you see water lilies and like pondweeds are floating pondweeds. And those ones, you kind of can't touch them. You do need a permit. You can apply for a permit to modify those. The next zone up is emergent vegetation. And this is like where you'll have starting to see cattails and some bulrushes and that kind of thing. And again, you need permits from the DNR. DNR do the watershed districts have permits for aquatic plants, or is that all DNR? Yes? DNR, all DNR. So you have to contact DNR for those. And then as you go up, the lake bank, which is kind of that area where you might see some erosion, that kind of step up. Again, permits are needed anywhere below ordinary high water mark. Above that, above the ordinary high water mark, permits might still be needed. That's going to be based on the zoning authority that you're contacting to find out. Because some of them have, tree rules and blanket, you can't cut down all the trees, you can't cut down all the vegetation. They have kind of blanket rules. You can't do this. They'll come out and take a look at it for you or answer your questions depending on what your plan looks like. This picture just shows that you can kind of see them all. You have the floating leaf vegetation, you have the emergent with the cattails back here, you have the lake bank, which you can see here, and then the more upland as you get farther away from the lake. And now we're going to talk about riprap. And riprap's a touchy situation, touchy subject. Landowners see riprap, right? They see riprap and they're like, that's what we have to have. Or assume that's what they're supposed to do when they own a piece of lake property. And it seems like kind of the easy fix. This will fix it. This will solve my problems forever. And as our technical staff, our job is kind of to talk through pros and cons of what riprap can do, what it can't do, and kind of figure out a happy medium between just rock, and all vegetation. Because we know that people have different reasons that they're on that lake. I talk to so many landowners every single year that I go out and I talk to them and I say, so what's your overall vision for this lakeshore? And they say, well, we had a contractor out and he said, we'll do riprap here. And that's the end of the conversation. The contractors are out there telling them, we are going to do riprap. That's what people do. And so you got to get that in your mind and you're like, oh, that's what I think I'm supposed to do. But there's so many options outside of riprap that we are kind of help navigate for you. And every time we go out on the lakeshore visit, we are talking to these landowners with multiple hats. Okay, so I'm a lakeshore owner. I go out and I do my lakeshore hat, like I am a lakeshore owner. This is what I want to do. This is what I did at my place. I put on my mom hat because my kids loved sand when they were little. They loved to play in the sand. So I'm okay with, sand is cool. I like sand. They can build stuff and they can have fun. And then I put on my water quality scientist hat and I know what's best for the lake. And there's absolutely a happy medium between those three things. And that's kind of our job, is to make sure that we can find that for each landowner. And every landowner is going to be different. So back to the riprap. Can we install riprap? Again, it's complicated. So anytime you're going to install riprap, I definitely suggest to call the DNR. They are the ones that are going to come back at you and say, yep, you can do that, or no, you can't. And the watershed districts as well. If the DNR says you can do it, check with the watershed district. They're going to be the next one to check with. So you can't always install riprap. Lots of people go out and assume, yeah, we can install riprap. That's what's done. We can do that. But there's this decision tree that goes through it. Can I install riprap or not? Is there erosion present? If there's not erosion present, you cannot install riprap without a permit. You can call the DNR and say, I want to apply for a permit, and you have every right to apply for a permit. You have every right to apply for the permit. Probably not going to get it, but you have every right to apply for it. So if you have erosion present and there is a marked need for riprap, then there's some more questions you have to answer. So is there any emergent vegetation there? Remember what the emergent vegetation was? was anything that was growing in the lake or just off the lake shore, pretty much under OHW, where it's growing and it can have wet feet. And if there is emergent vegetation there, you have to get a permit. You can apply to get a permit from the DNR, from the fisheries department. Because if you're covering plants, guess what else you're covering? Fish habitat. And you cannot always get that permit. You can apply for it, but sometimes you're not going to be able to get it. So if there's not vegetation present, you can follow what they call the DNR riprap fact sheet or worksheet. It's at this link. There's a lot of useful stuff at that link about, things you can and can't do, beaches and boat ramps and riprap and aquatic plant removal, all kinds of things at that website as well. But you can use, if you're not covering emergent vegetation and you have erosion present, you can follow this worksheet to install riprap. There are a lot of rules on what that looks like you have to follow exactly on those rules. But something to remember is that the riprap cannot go more than 6 feet waterward, so into the water, into the lake bed from that ordinary high water level. So this one, for example, the ordinary high water mark is here. And it's 10 feet to the lake edge. So why would we put riprap up on this hillside, right? There's not always a place where that can even help. If the water level of the lake is typically lower than that ordinary high water mark, it's probably not going to help you. Same up here. This is another one. This is all lake bed. Ordinary high water mark is back here on this tree line. So you can put 6 feet of riprap, but that'd look pretty dumb, right? You got no water anywhere close to it. And that's where we talk with the landowners, like, do you just think this is what you're supposed to do? Or do you like that hardscape look? Do you like the look of the riprap? Are you doing it for aesthetics, or are you doing it because somebody told you you should do it? But look, in all these situations, these are situations where no, you're not going to be able to put riprap under this worksheet. You can absolutely apply for a permit to put riprap on. This one down here on the bottom corner right here, this one might be a situation, but changing your mowing practices would solve that little erosion problem that's there. So it's probably going to be one of those where the hydrologist, DNR hydrologist, could say, maybe, maybe not. So enough talk about riprap. Okay. So, there are absolutely places where hard armor is needed. We all understand that. But there are also a lot of situations where it's not needed. You can't do it without applying for a permit, or it's just not going to be the best situation. So got to think through those things about what is best for the lake and what is not best for the lake. So here are just kind of, this one might be, if you're not going to look at the presentations after the fact, this might be something to take a picture of. Kind of listen out all of the places where you could call to find out more information, to check on your project that you're looking at, and to kind of help you remember, like, who do I call? How many people do I call? Because it's not always just a one-stop shop. But these are places where they're going to give you more information. And any of us are going to, if you have questions and we don't know them, we'll help you figure out who you need to talk to. That's one of the very important things to remember. So, anybody have any other questions or any questions at all? Sure. I have not been out yet. I have not. Yep. 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 Well, so the rule on ice heaves, there is also a DNR shoreline brochure about ice heaves. the rule on that's, I believe, is that the next topic here? Somebody's going to talk about it next. Okay. Yep. But there are some rules surrounding when you can do that and when you can't, you know, what you can modify. And that the rule is the first year after it happens is when you can touch that ice heave. After that, you cannot. That's the rule surrounding it. Tom's going to talk about kind of all the ins and outs and what we're seeing out there this year. And I can't say we because I haven't been around yet, but what people are seeing, what we're hearing. We're at the time right now where we are going to start getting calls all day long about what's going on the lakeshore. So Tom can help. Tom will go through his presentation too and go from there. So anybody else? Okay, thank you. Yeah. I don't know how to get you.
Perfect. I'll try to answer any and all questions, but I'm hoping this presentation will touch on quite a bit for you. Many in this room are here because of this topic. This is an email somebody in the audience like with us that just explained we first became aware of massive ice heaving. Big marine lake, west side of the shoreline being destroyed, heaves. So we did a little recon and investigating. And just for context, here's two photos before and after. I'm going to start on this side. So this is spring 2024. You can see riprap, flat area, this pole, a little bit of a beach. Behind it, you can see a historic ice ridge. Come back to that in a minute. But then here's that same area. So you can see this timber. Here's that timber, substantially pushed up. Kind of hard to tell from this angle, but that birdhouse pole is leaning back. Again, massive ice push in terms of pushing this back. What is an ice heave? Kind of ice heaves happen in two ways. There's the pushing part and then there's the heaving part. So in the dead of winter, that's usually the ice heave. So as without snow cover, extreme swings in temperature, what happens is ice across the entire lake, not just the shoreline area, is cracking, filling with water, it refreezes and it expands. So it's constantly pushing out harder, further and further, to the point what we see is something like this diagram. Most commonly, you see it right at the top of a slope, where in this case, the diagram is showing the riprap that was here is displaced. Underneath it is a large sediment mound. Sometimes you also see secondary buckling or heaving further behind. Significant ice heaving events typically have both. So did a little recon this winter after getting a handful of calls. I know some of these images are small, but just to depict some of it, here's me. I'm about 6 feet tall. Granted, I'm standing on the water, but you can see the damage that's being done. Love this image where a rock shoreline, this is that heaving part behind it is just a massive pile of sediment. Reference, here's a telephone pole, kayaks and all that. So that is a significant push, quite large. So going through all of that, see different cases of it. You can see trees in it. Here's a natural shoreline condition. And even in here, there's a little bit of fresh heaving on the front slope of this. And there's likely some historic heaving. I'll just say heaving is, yeah, question. Yep. Yep. Yeah, so I mean, even for added context, I agree. Most people don't plant trees sideways. So Mother Nature over decades or years, I guess, do you know when the tree was planted? Yeah, I mean, it's quite a large willow. So just context, the willow is probably serving a purpose of helping hold the shoreline together from wave action and erosion. But what I like to summarize this is considered, I'll just call it the act of God. We live in Minnesota. I'll flip the analogy. We live in Minnesota. We get hail. We know it's likely going to hail every single summer. How significant that hail is, where it's going to hit, where it's going to be so significant that it damages, hard to predict. Same case with significant ice heaving. Here's another local lake for us. Similarly, just depicting, this is hard to see, but there's a historic ice ridge in here, probably only about 2 feet tall. A lot of trees planted along it. But here's a rock shoreline. This was rip-wrapped in November. That riprap was at a 3-to-1 slope. It's been pushed up. Right behind it, there's a little piece of fabric showing. Going on, there's just a lot of different looks. That here, there's actually like a cavern. The ice is pushed up. It's frozen still, and it's about 3 feet. You could stick your hand under. So it's just completely lifted. Here's that secondary buckling happening further behind, actually upheaving a patio. Here's one where it didn't actually hit the shoreline, but it started to buckle out in the lake. So again, looks different, site dependent, and it changes on an annual basis. So as Casey pointed out in her talk, and I'll touch on some of that here, is there's a lot of regulations and jurisdictional aspects, and I'll speak to more of those here. But one of the regulatory program goals for us, our watershed management plan, is really to help people streamline this. How do we come up with a system so that you don't, as a landowner or contractor, necessarily have to call and work with 3 different separate entities to obtain permits, potentially from all 3, to then go in and fix something like this. So there's kind of 2 parts of fixing and correcting in a heave, and then knowing who to contact and notify. So this image was previously shown, but just blowing it up. This is probably the toughest thing to communicate with people because of what the regulations say and what the perception is. If you're a homeowner, you just view this as your property. If you're a contractor, you view this as your client's property. So depending on where you're working on that lakeshore property, you fall into common names of kind of the shoreland or the upland area. I'll say this transitional zone called the shoreline, and then you get out into what you clearly would call the lake. Well, again, ice heaving happens in this really gray area called the shoreline. In our jurisdiction, or in our watershed in northern Washington County here, to do any work in this area, you likely need to work with the watershed, the county, township, or the city. So city folks in Scandy here, the city, your say May Township, it would be the county and DNR. It's very rare where a shoreline project is all below the OHW, or very rare that it is all above the OH. Think of that ice heave. It's the lake pushing up, but the heave portion is all upland. So who do you contact? You. Hopefully I'll touch on some more of that here. Terms, and I know Casey covered some of this. Here's my more layman's terms for it. Your upland regulatory entities, your city, your county, their most critical area is called the shore impact zone. This is 50% of what the regulating structure setback is. For most lakes, it's 50 feet. Sometimes it shrinks a little bit depending on where you are. But the concept here is ordinances, local rules. You're supposed to put hard structures, impervious surfaces so far back from the lake, 50% of the distance. Now that's all great, but what if you're a property owner, or what if your client is somebody that they developed prior to these ordinances? There's other nuances in there, but it's kind of still that concept about 50% of that setback and deviate per property. The other thing is this ordinary high water mark. I won't cover this too much, besides reiterating what Casey said is the most common misconception is people perceive it's where they saw the water or where they thought they saw the water during a flood event. Best way to get that is an elevation. DNR is a great website. If you do work with a watershed, Watershed can help. And if you're a contractor looking to do work on a shoreline, I'll say for me, I commonly go out and I will tell people we do lake gauges and we can back calculate on the given day where that OHW mark is. But for the sake of a project, odds are you're working both above and below. So play a little game here. I want to make this interactive. I know it's early, but your coffee has kicked in by now. Guarantee it. So we're going to play a little game of identify both these pictures where this is and the OHW are. So we can turn this into homeowners versus contractors. We could split the room in half, but what I want to see is hands go up in the air where you think the OHW is on this top image. I'm just going to slide this up. And when I hit the mark, just raise your hand. I know, sorry, elementary here, but I'm trying to wake everybody up. Try to make regulations fun. But when you think I hit the OHW, okay, being somewhere in here, anybody think it's higher? Couple hands still up. Well, I can tell you it's not the house. Can't build in the lake. So that's the good news. And it's not way out here because there's water. But yeah, it's somewhere in here. I don't actually know on this lake. I just pulled a random photo, but it's proving the point of if you show up at somebody's site, if I showed up at a different lake that I don't work on commonly, I can't tell you. If I come back to this property a month from now and the water level's lower or higher, again, I can't tell you as a common person. But what I can do as a regulator or somebody in working for the SWCD or the city is help you find the answer to that. Let's use the same graphic. Where do you think the shore impact zone is? Intent, it's going to be the same answer of what I just said. I don't exactly know, but let me know where you think 50% of the structure setback is. And kind of where this guy's standing. Yeah, I would probably agree somewhere in there. So just painting that image, if you're doing any work from where that guy's standing out to the water, you likely need to work with multiple jurisdictional entities to obtain permits to do any form of grading. Your city, your township has what's called grading or land alteration permits. Croix this shoreline, which I wouldn't recommend because it's stable. But if you did, if you needed to come in and mow all the vegetation, cut down this tree, you likely need permits from your city or your LGU. And if you start doing work out in the water, permitting is likely going to be DNR. So you can see how both. I won't quite do it here, but you can see the potentially different challenges. Typically when I've asked this, people will say, yeah, right where this person has decided to put the landscaping block is likely where the OHW is. I probably agree with that sentiment. You can also see that this looks kind of destroyed and damaged because they likely photos taken after a receding flood event. But you can see in this photo that while the shore by ordinance, the shore impact zone is probably behind the house on the street. Well, that doesn't really help you, but just for context, again, some of the unique challenges, the rules and ordinances and why individual sites can be challenging. So ice heave, I'm going to dive more into this, but really, so this concept of you're trying to fix an ice heave, here's all the different kind of pools and parties of people that are involved, a landowner, a contractor, you got the DNR, your state regulators, and then you have your local authorities involved. So as Casey pointed out, most people start and we'll go, I'll go through their specific criteria here in a minute, but one of their requirements is that you actually must notify the LGU, the watershed, if you're in an area with a watershed, and your soil and water conservation district. Again, this is going to be an easy one because no one actually has to raise their hand for this question, but who wants to call 3 people to fix a problem on their property? I knew it. 100% of people say, I don't want to do it. I agree with you. So how do we streamline this? The DNR also requires, here's the bulleted list. If you go on that website and look at the DNR, all the criteria that have to be met. If you meet all these criteria, DNR says you don't actually need to contact us. You still need to contact all those 3 other entities, but you don't need a permit from us. First is the ice ridge needs to happen within the last year. Well, what if I have a historic ice heave and it got worse? That's a common question I get from people. DNR's response is you can only remove the portion of the heave that occurred in the last year. I know, nuance, like how do you prove that? But here's an example. Again, here's the cutoff. This is a historic ice heave on this property. I'm guessing that this heave has gotten a foot taller after this year. How do you go in? You're basically cutting off just the extra heave on top. That's not really helping a landowner solve it, but just letting you know that that's what they mean within the last year. It's the portion of the property that is heaved. You can fix that year without a permit. If you do, if it's more, if it's a historic, you need a permit. Permitting, I don't want to say synonymous with you can't do it. the objective here is to help people understand what's the impact. If this happened to you every single year, odds are if you fix this every single year, you're going to actually be destabilizing your shoreline to make it more prone to happen every single year. Next bullet point, the project is either exempt from local permits or is authorized under an LGU permit. Again, I can tell you on this lake, this heave is not below the OHW. This heave is all above the OHW. So in this case, what does the city of Scandia say about, can you remove this? To remove that, you need to grade. You might need to bring in some additional fill or something. So what can you do? I'll touch on the LGU requirements in a minute, but just calling that out, like their points acknowledged, again, you need to contact. Not more than 200 feet. I'll say most people are blessed with less than 200 feet of shoreline, but if you're a fortunate landowner that you have more than 200 feet, if you want to fix it all, you have to notify DNR. And the premise here is if you're removing an ice heave more than 200 feet on your property, is it just hits a scale where that's a significant amount to remove, fix, correct, and actually get back to a stable condition. So they most likely the permitting process would want to make sure you're doing it in phases in a way that you can actually maintain it, stabilize it. Ice ridge material. So here's what they say. If this ridge is composed, the portion of this ridge that is muck, clay, or organic sediment, you can deposit it somewhere on the upland. In other words, you can't push nutrients and organic rich material out into the water for water quality purposes. If it's comprised of sand or gravel, which a lot of this is, you can use that to regrade that 3-to-1 slope. The reason is because the sand, the gravel isn't going to be containing the nutrient component. So in other words here, if I was working on this, I'd scrape the topsoil, get down to that gravel, and I'd regrade that slope. And then if I had rock or riprap and that's what I wanted to do, I would put that back down. If I had, in this case, turf grass, then I could reseed it, sod it, something of that nature. No additional excavation, replacement, or fill. I'm going to touch on this one a little bit more because this is where I'll say people view this type of as an opportunity. I've heaved. I never really liked my shoreline. Now let me do something different. Not saying you can't do something different, but that is not a non-exempt criteria. You can't change. The goal of it is you have to basically restore the previous condition that existed. So if you cut out 3 trees, because you have to regrade this, you have to replant 3 trees. If it exists as turf grass, you have to return it to turf grass. The other thing what we'll see is sometimes people will carve out like, oh, we're doing mass excavation. Let's carve a bump out because my client or I want a little bit of a beach. Again, that requires permitting. That's not one of these. No. And then the other main thing here is all materials or all regraded areas must be stabilized immediately. Generally, I tell people that's about a 48-hour window. And the goal is, again, because in open water, if you grade that and it looks nice and sandy and a big boat comes by, it's just going to continue to erode. So the goal is to work with people like, here's some basic criteria. If you can meet all these, go ahead, fix the problem. No one wants to get in the way of fixing the problem. These are the guidelines to help ensure that by fixing the problem, you're not helping facilitate a lasting problem or making it worse. The LGU requirements. So I'm just going to talk on Washington County and Scandia because these are the 2 LGUs that I work with. Yeah, question. Yep, I'm going to come back to that topic a little bit, kind of on both cases, both going like an opportunity to hard armor more or an opportunity to go softer stabilization techniques. So, correct. Yep. So LGU requirements. So if you are a township resident, Washington County, the county actually has shoreland authority. The townships have said, we don't want to deal with shoreland property owners. So county, you get to do that for us. Not exactly what they say, but just me, again, paraphrasing it. But the county actually requires any grading within that shore impact zone to get a permit. So to fix an ice heave, you need a county permit if you live within the township. City of Scandia, they have a threshold. You can fix an ice heave, as long as, without a permit, as long as you are not disturbing or bringing in or working with more than 10 cubic yards or disturbing 600 square feet of land or more. More than that, you need a grading permit. So again, this isn't just the DNR. DNR does it, their guidelines. This is part of the reason why. Now, I'll say part of my goal has been streamlining and working through this process. I can tell you that neither of these two entities want to get in the way of you guys fixing shorelines within Washington County. But the question was, how do we make this a joint process between the watershed, these two entities, city? So, oh, sorry, I got ahead of myself. That slide's coming up of what you can do to make it the notification easy. So here's some examples of just things I want to highlight. Here's that turf grass where I said, you know, it could stick my whole arm underneath this because it's just popped up. Odds are that's going to settle back down once the ice goes out. Here's my quiz question. You came in as a homeowner or contractor to fix the shoreline. What does that entail? What does that look like? What can you do to this shoreline on the previous criteria? You put in rock, put in turf grass. So where do you base your hand? Yeah, turf grass. So, right, this is turf grass to water. You can see underneath there's not a lot root mass holding it together. I know we'll touch on that. Laura will probably touch on it more. Why turf grass to water is not the best thing to actually stabilize the shoreline. But in this case, yeah, you could fix this. You could regrade it out, but you'd have to restore the turf grass. Here's another one. This is probably much more common for people. Well, I put in this riprap years ago. It never looked like that until this year. I don't want to look at fabric. Pushed up, I want to correct this. Under the ice heave exemption, you could regrade this out, put the rock back on top. Behind it, you can actually see here's that secondary ridge. Get a little bit better up top. Again, Washington, this property is in Washington County. Here's a good question. At what point, I'll do the game again. At what point do you hit the OHW? It's going to be actually somewhere right in here. So DNR says you can do this. The county says if you grade anything, so if you want to take this out or do above, you need a permit. Again, it's not going to say no. Permitting isn't synonymous with no. It just means there's a process and a review, some planning stuff that needs to go in. But just to highlight another example. In this case, yeah, the rock can go back. Every entity will work with you to approve that you could re-riprap this and take this out, return that upland area back to turf grass. Here's an example. This one's in Scandia. And that game of where the OHW is. Somebody started fixing their shoreline in the middle of winter. Two issues with this. They didn't know where the OHW was. So what's upland and what's below. This is approximately 100 feet of shoreline. So is this greater than 10 cubic yards of excavation? Is it greater than 600 square feet? I won't get into the nuances, but then the biggest issue is you can see it's still winter. How do you actually get this to stabilize within 48 hours? Now you could blanket it, you can do things to help, but again, the goal is to try to get something to grow as fast as possible or get something back. An open face like this is likely just going to be prone to bring runoff, washout issues. So just highlighting again, some of the timing, structural replacement. Here's some photos. Look, you can see here's the ice ridge pushed up basically onto the deck. Here's one where you can see it's actually lifting portions of the deck. Don't know on this one specifically, but I guess it just raises the question from the LGU standpoint, can you fix this? Like what if this is your home foundation cracked? Or what if your deck was destroyed? Can you fix it? In short, the answer is yes. Again, no entity wants you to get in the way of fixing it. But the big thing is you have to fix it in kind. Basically, what you see, what was there, again, you have to restore it. You can't make it bigger. You can't turn timber walls into big rock walls, or you can't take rock walls and turn them into timber walls. The goal is to, within city requirements is within 180 days. So basically the summer months, you can fix this without question. This one? Oh, perfect. Nice to meet you. I didn't know that was you, so I have this photo. Thanks. I'm glad to connect people. Yep. Yep. Okay. Yeah, there is. Yeah, so in the case of trying to so you can restore, so even if your shoreline maybe wasn't quite 3 to 1 previously, I guess the requirements would say you can restore it back to what it was. The more close in the case of getting to a 3 to 1, the better. So the second part of your question of is there a way to prevent it from happening again? And short answer is no. At least not like, again, the act of God component of this is, I wish we could say that there's an easy solution to preventing it. Interesting. Okay. Sure. Yeah. That's a good point. So I should clarify, I'm not an insurance adjuster, but I just use a term that an insurance adjuster would use as act of God. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's good to know. So what I can tell you is, yeah, the hard part in your case is, um, it's not, if you had an option, if you physically could, I bet you would pick up your house and try to move it further back from the lake with everything. Obviously, you can't do it. I know a lot of these lots are small and historically built where now the water is very close and everything. Um, we can talk more. Um, uh, maybe what Lori shares will help give you some potential options, but I guess maybe for the sake of my presentation portion here, what I'll say here is, again, everybody is going to do everything they can to work with you so that you have the paperwork and paper trail that says, do what you need to fix this problem. And if people aren't helping you, contact me and I'll help you. I'll get them to help you work through this. So on the, yeah, uh, yeah, I mean, great questions. I guess that's beyond what I can probably comment on. It's not, it's a fixed weir structure that's with DNR. So I'd have to default to what would be the process to remove and change that to be more operational. I know it's a concern that we've, as the watershed have heard, and I know we've shared at least what ability we do have to control the water level. And it's a tough situation because by lowering water level on one to benefit one part of the lake, it impacts others differently, but probably all I can really comment on at a high level on that. So on the back table or residents that are within our jurisdiction, you should be receiving something in the mail this week of how do you go through a notification? Contractors, if you're working in the area, your landowner should likely be receiving that. There's a little bit of some fact sheets on the back table too. But really, so again, I just went through a whole laundry list of like this, that, and how does it apply to yours? A lot of this is just defaulting to you guys to inform us or notify us. Again, the requirement is we need notification, but there's notification can be as simple as clicking a button that says, hey, I'm doing work on this property. I'm going to follow all the guidelines that were quickly outlined in terms of I'm under this disturbance threshold. I'm just returning the shoreline back to its former condition. Great, thanks. We have the notice. You can proceed when appropriate. Otherwise, we have an opportunity where some people are like, I've destroyed, the shoreline's destroyed. I want to do something different than what I previously. So I'm going to cover a little bit of that here. But if that letter that you'll receive, or again, when this comes out, there's a tiny URL. If you were to click on this or type this into your browser, it's going to take you to a basic form that asks, where do you live? Are you the property owner? Are you a contractor on behalf of a property owner? Just so we know who we can get in touch with and how to send. Then it asks kind of 2 follow-up questions. And it's like, I'm providing notice. Again, this is where you could click the button. This property has ice heave damage and I'll be restoring it back to the DNR's criteria. So again, not pushing the topsoil into the lake, but regrading, re-putting down riprap or the previous turf grass or whatever existed. This property is ice heave damaged and I want a new shoreline condition and I need more assistance. I'm not going to go through all the nuances today of what that entails, but again, we'll help you because we also agree that now could be a good opportunity to do something different on your property. If you've always kind of been curious of trying something different, we're willing to work with you. And then sometimes, you could be a property owner. I don't actually have ice heave damage this year. I lucked out. But I would like to understand how do I go about changing something on my shoreline or in that sensitive area. And then down here, it just talks more about, are you actually interested in different types of shorelines designs? Are you interested in doing enhancements that might be grant eligible? So Lori will cover this topic a little bit more of what some of those grant opportunities are. Or would you like me or somebody else to actually just come out to your site to document, take some photos or talk with you about your unique individual situation? We're happy to do that. Alternatives, I just wanted a quick highlight here. I won't steal Lori's thunder too much, but here's alternatives. So if you currently have a lot of rock or turf grass, here's alternatives. Here's former riprap that actually wasn't removed. It was just capped with some sediment and then it was vegetated. Same down here. Here's some different looks where people are like, maybe I don't actually need 8 feet of ramped rock. Now's a good time. I can leave a little bit down by the water and actually maybe restore some buffer habitat on the upland portion to kind of hold that sediment better. And then this is a design called bioengineering where what you see is a single row of tow rock, but there's actually 2 to 4 more rows of rock behind that. It gets wrapped with soil and planted with vegetation. And I'm going to step through this actual project example here in a minute of the sequencing and timeline of what that formerly looked like to what it looks like in this photo today. So just want to quick cover a couple of these common violations following ice heaves. Again, this is speaking and going what I'll say what the rules don't allow, going in the wrong direction according to the regulations of here's a shoreline that was maybe somewhat eroding, but you can see that there really wasn't much there to hold it together anyway. It started to heave a little bit. The solution was to put in rock. That required permitting. You can't go from a bare dirt, turf grass, correct the ice heave, and then install something. Again, it would have to go back to a turf grass condition. Here's another one. I think this one's a little bit more clear. You can see the actual heaving that happened. And then the solution was to fix it. You can see all the disturbance behind it. 3 here is the reference point. And then all rock again. Not saying this can't be done, but this is a situation where to do this required permitting to remove the heave and restore the turf grass. I touched on this a little bit, but restoring, here's another thing like, okay, my shoreline is one thing, but what do I do with this? Many landowners will say, well, this is a relic. I don't really want this in here. Well, you can remove it and not put it back in, and you don't need a permit. But if you want to go with a different look, if you don't want to actually restore timber walls, if you want to put in big rock boulders or different things like that, that's where we need to have a conversation about what you can do as a individual landowner. So just talking on this, if it's sometimes the perception is we want to put in rock because it actually stops ice heaving. I think these photos speak for themselves. Here I'm standing out on this side of it. Well, you can see on the back side of it, this is equally as tall. That's massive. Rock doesn't stop something like this. It just distorts it, displaces a lot of it, and sometimes it's tough to fix. So what are options here? Just kind of covering a few really, a lot of the rules and regulations are trying to incorporate native plantings. And I know, again, this isn't necessarily going to prevent ice heaving, but what this does is here's turf grass, then the root mass below turf grass, which is some of these native plants go down deeper. If you're willing and open to adding shrubs and trees as they mature and get older, they start to help armor and protect the shoreline a little bit more. So what we tell people is if you have the ability and capacity and desire, a natural shoreline is best. And there's ways to help promote that. More expensive, but a common approach that many people are trying to do is this bioengineering design, where again, behind this is backer boulder, backer rock. And then the exception kind of becomes riprapping. But again, if in riprapping cases, if you're open to it, through ice heave correction, you can still work to try to incorporate native vegetation. So I love some of these slides because sometimes we get people come to me and say, well, that's not going to work. And then it's funny because you can look at their property, the neighbor next to them, and say, well, what are they doing and how are they making it work? So again, case by case, but we just like to highlight to people like, this doesn't benefit the lake. It might armor your shoreline, but I think if we can find opportunities to incorporate, this might not be your individual desired aesthetic, but maybe you're open to a natural shoreline concept. That's where Lori and team come into play, where they work with you to kind of carve out areas. Maybe you don't want to do it your full lot line. Maybe you just want to take a chunk, try something. Open to that. So going back to that other one, here's that shoreline of that nice bioengineered design. It had ice heaved historically. It was eroding. Their solution originally was, let's build a rock wall. Having conversations, it's like, well, that isn't going to stabilize because the next time big waves come crashing, the soil behind it's going to erode. The rock, after I've dealt with a few of these, not on this property, but ice heave hits this one winter, a minor push, and the rock tumbles into the lake. So it's not really a great solution. So they came to us, what's the solution? I'll be curious. I'm going to try to go buy this property this spring now after massive ice heaving on Big Marine Lake to see how this type of shoreline did hold up. But from being installed 3 years later, it's still looking great, phenomenal like this. But you can just see the difference in this benefits the lake. It's not trying to impede, the person still has their little walkout, their little platform. They have a different location for their dock. But this is generally a benefit to the lake. Yeah. The far east bay. Yep. Correct. Right. Sure. Yeah, Jeff. So yeah, you're right. Like again, sites are variable. Every lot's different, and that's just part of the conversation. Is like if we can come out to your site, we could talk through solutions. I do agree that the west side of Big Marine Lake has a whole history in of itself of what it historically was before it was developed. Historically, I think in the 50s, 60s, the extreme low water level when a lot of the shoreline developed, and now the challenges today. So, right. I think regardless of all of that, there's opportunities of what we're trying to talk through here is people have opportunities to do different things, and there's just processes, and we want to help you navigate through that. So yeah, landowners, we've heard, you want an expedited notification process, trying to simplify what are their guidelines, what are requirements. Do contractors know about this? A lot of them are in the room, so maybe you guys can connect if you're looking for help to do some corrective work. And then Lori will talk about how to streamline design and maybe some cost share opportunity where we all can work together on the topic. Why is all this important? Well, the state came out with stressor identification report saying the loss of natural shoreline is leading to biological impairments of the lake. And I know we've talked to individual groups and a lot of you here specific to your lake of what some of this means. For those that are new, I mean, one of the things given today's talk, I'd just like to highlight this is granted parcel by parcel, and I know there's uniqueness to Big Marine Lake with large tracts, but just kind of an interesting parallel that I've reviewed this on other area lakes outside of, or I should say, other lakes outside of this area, and there is an association between what goes on the shoreline with the health of the fish community, and that's really, I guess, now could be a good opportunity to make some of these corrections that blend how you're using your property, or how your clients are using their property, and what the lake needs, and then maybe introduce some new ways to help stabilize things. So that's what I have. I don't know where we're at timing wise, but if questions, certainly. Yeah.
And if we could, what I'll do is I'll bring the microphone around so that this is being recorded so online audiences could hear the questions. So who had the first question?
Yeah.
Established that that number can't change, but that's nothing more than an elevation, but not a location. And that sometimes put things at odds, meaning that if you have erosion, that's going to move that ordinary high water line further landward than if you didn't have erosion. The same thing taking place when you have ice heaves or jackets and things that moves it landward. And customers a lot of times suffer because they want to reclaim that land. But when you come out there, now you establish this point in distance, not an elevation. So it's more of a comment than anything, but I'm finding a lot of times it being at odds when a situation comes where we're looking at a heave. We go back to when you had a retaining wall location. You have a retaining wall that can put the ordinary water further towards the lake. Then when you pull the retaining wall out and put a slope in there, now you've moved that ordinary high water line back into the yard. So there becomes that argument as to what can I do? That sometimes, I don't know if you've gotten involved with it, but especially customers that have existing structures that are closer to the lake, they want to get their land back.
Yep.
And that's another process in itself. But that's where a lot of people say, yes, you can't change ordinary high water elevation, but the location often changes.
Yeah.
So the second thing that I wanted a more question about is a lot of counties I'm hearing I think it came in a couple of years ago, Minnesota adopted some statute regarding permit requirements for any work done within 300 feet of a lake or 1,000 feet of a lake.
Yep.
And or 300 feet of a river straight somewhere.
Yep.
So to me, that implies that you can't do any kind of work without at least applying for a permit, period, around the lake, because that's quite a distance. How do you address that, I guess, in seeking the ability to do anything?
Yeah.
Is that part of Washington County? Have they adopted that now?
Yeah.
That they're going to have that requirement, lock, stock, and barrel. That's it. You can't do anything because you're working on a lake shore. It's within 300 feet,
Yep.
or excuse me, within 1,000 feet.
Yeah. So great question. I'll start with the second one, and you might need to remind me of the first one. But the DNR has what's called DNR Shoreline Model Ordinances. It's basically a criteria that communities have to adopt, and they can go stricter. But that boundary of what is the shoreland, it's 1,000 feet from the OHW landward. And that's where, say, if you're in the May Township or working with a township, that's the jurisdictional boundary, that 1,000 feet from those bodies where the townships on public waters go county, you take care of permitting and zoning authority. And if it's outside of that, they'll take care of that. So I don't want to say it becomes a magical boundary whether you need permits or not. It's a boundary that helps the regulators, I guess, kind of differentiate who is the main point of contact within that. So if
Or period, because you are doing lakeshore work, because they don't.
Yeah,
have it
so-
written, or is it just
it's the nuances within that. So, right. So in my example of, Washington County has shoreland authority for that 1,000 feet within, but the further you get to that 1,000 foot versus the 0 mark, the 0 to 50 foot, they say any work, any grading or land alteration within that first 50 feet, you need a permit. If you get from 50 feet, you start going further and further away, they'll have clauses that basically say, once you hit a threshold is when you need a permit. And then what, I guess, to simplify, what I tell people is, like, if you're doing any work on a property that's riparian or you have questions, that's why it's like, hey, if you poke the land use authority and say, this is what I'm looking at doing, here's a photo of the site, like, I'm looking to restore this. Like, if somebody sent this to us, we would quickly try to come up with, here's what you can and cannot do. Under an ice heave, so going back to your first question of the whole OHW component, you're right. Like if you were to remove this and regrade a 3-to-1 slope, and if this had been a regrade 3-to-1, well, I guess in theory, back a foot or so. So that's what I'll say there. Under the ice heave, though, the rule would say, though, if you want to reestablish that previous existing wall and everything, assuming it wasn't put in illegally or whatever previously, then you have the ability to restore that under the ice heave, assuming that's the issue. It's hard to apply, like
More of a comment than anything that, you know, although that ordinary high water level doesn't change, it
Yep.
doesn't, but its location does, and it does vary from season to season, depending upon how much sediment can be deposited or
Yep.
pulled away, naturally erosion
Yep.
and reclamation. But a case of a retaining wall can be a thing.
Yeah, so maybe on that, the other thing I'll point
Yeah.
out, so in a case like this is why the DNR rules basically say, like, don't push the organic material back, but you can use this sediment, because in this case, you can see that massive pile of sediment that was once probably 2 feet out further or foot out further has now pushed all the way up here. So in theory, what you're saying, yeah, the landowner has now lost some of their property because that magical line moved back. But the DNR acknowledges you can actually push this back into the lake, sand, the gravel component, you can push that back out to reestablish from an aerial perspective that you're not actually slowly losing your property. Correct. Well, you could retop it, but you can't push sod and organic dirt into the water. Right. So So you could reestablish the grade, if it's sand. If you're using the sand and gravel that's there. Now, again, if you're looking back over history and time, like this is just annual ice heave, so don't view this as like, well, my property line used to be 100 feet out that way. Now I'm just going to fill all the way. Like this is not that's not what I'm talking about. This is simply like the material that's here, push it back. Part of what the DNR will tell you is, yeah, ice heaving and correcting ice heaves year after year, you're likely going to slowly lose upland. It's part of the reason why using native plants and everything is the desire, because you can't prevent ice heaving, but if every single year this happened and you tried to correct it, you're slowly going to be receding. Permitting and all that can probably work with people to restore well-established zoning or like where land was. But it's really hard to say 50 years ago, this is where the land was. Question.
Yeah, so if you took all those rocks off the shoreline, put them 6 feet into the lake so they're out of the way, stripped off the topsoil, sod, garbage, you can regrade that back into the lake and put the rock back on.
I'll go back to
Yeah,
I think something to make
Yes.
sure that we're differentiating between, there's two different questions. Ice heave, different animal erosion. So ice heave, the answers are different, not reclaiming. Not that ordinary high water mark, where that hits each year could be a different level, and you cannot reclaim. Can't say, oh, well, this fell off last year, I want that yard back. You cannot.
but if it was from this year,
Yeah, so if it's ice heave, it's a different.
yeah, and 95% of them that we're looking at are all ice heaves.
Sure.
And
Yep.
people are frustrated
You guys
because they're like,
demonstrated that a couple
we
times.
lost 5 feet of property.
Yep.
And I've been saying, hey, we've got to haul it all out because
Yep.
you can't push anything back into the lake.
Yep.
But if we take the topsoil and sod off,
Yep.
it's clean material,
Correct.
it can be graded back into the lake.
Yep, exactly what this cross section is trying to highlight here is, again, the sand gravel component of this underlying sediment can be reused to establish this grade. And then the rock that has been, as a contractor, you're going to move that out of the way. You're going to try to reuse as much as this, get the slope back, and then put the rock back down. That, assuming the shoreline existed as riprap, totally can do. Yep. With the simple notification. If what I can say is for a landowner or a contractor, my advice is the best way to just do all this is you show up at a site, snap a photo. You can do it before, after. You can send your before photo to the local people and say, this is what it looks like. I'm going to follow, and we can send out, we can make available that DNR guideline that went through all those bullet points. And you're basically saying again, I'm going to restore this according to like this cross section and these guidelines. Everybody's going to say, great, thank you for letting us know. Please proceed with that. Yep.
I've seen many pictures of the push-up with riprap and rock in that. So something's wrong with that philosophy. What does a natural, if we redid it, and did plants and everything, how does that affect the heave? How does that shoreline react?
Yeah, a great question. So it doesn't, I can't make any guarantees that a natural native shoreline is going to prevent an ice heave. Some of the anecdotal evidence, observation stuff is some natural shorelines that we've visited this year that, so this shoreline is 5 or 6 properties north of this one. Now, again, every site's different. Ice works differently on a lake. So I don't want to say that this couldn't have heaved as significantly of this, but we have a photo of this shoreline from last year to now this winter. And I'll say the only ice heave component is about a 6-inch bump on the front side. So anecdotally, like it seems like this shoreline was probably protected somewhat because of the rooting of all of these trees. But again, I won't stand here and promise you that if you did this, it's going to prevent your ice heave. I think the clear takeaway, what I can say about ice heaves is we haven't seen a design yet that this type of winter that we just had is going to prevent it. Like I said, this was fresh riprap last November. It heaved significantly. Some of the big marine examples, I'm standing next to a rock that is as big as, comes up to my waist. Certain shorelines, a lot of rock looks that big. This has a lot of big rock and it's completely displaced. And that's where I guess I personally just called it like the act of God. I'm not the insurance adjuster. But it's like, man, again, we've had engineers look at this concept. It was something. So with that, I'm getting the sign. My time is up. I will be lingering and around. So thank you.
We'd like to take a 10-minute break so people can go to the bathroom, get some more food, get some coffee. We did already build in half an hour for Q&A at the end. So since we did some of that right now, we might just kind of shrink the Q&A to be 15 minutes at the end to make sure we have time for both of our final presenters. Lori Tella will be talking about some of those landscaping strategies for ice heaves, and then Michael Welch will come in and talk about the legal perspective.
Any of these. So we've got ag projects are huge right now. We've got a lot of extra funding coming down for helping agricultural farmers. Cool new innovative projects, so like green roofs, any kind of proprietary practices, native gardens, big and small, lawn alternatives, all of this good stuff. We have experts that know how to do prairie restoration, buckthorn removal. So feel free to contact us with anything even outside of shorelines. We do free site visits. We have funding from the county. Washington County provides us enough time to go out and do about an hour site visit with as many people until our money's out. So we go out and we do a free site visit. You can have us come out with you. You can refer your landowners to come out, or as a landowner, just call. We can provide technical assistance, like a quick concept and handouts. If the project qualifies for one of these many water quality grants, then we can do detailed design. We can help you with cost estimating. We can go look for other money. So we're there to help. There is assistance. So this is the website you'll direct people to. This is just Washington County, but you can have people go to the am in WCD and there's a sign up form. And what's cool about that is it'll let you know what watershed district you are in. So if you don't know whose rules, you can pay attention. It'll pull up like where it is. So we do site evaluation. I go out, I'm kind of a detective. So I go out and talk to all the different landowners, try and figure out what's causing the erosion up, downstream, what's the issue here. Lots of times there's concerns on adjacent properties. But yeah, the soils, I pull the soil history. I look at the history of the ecology. I have access to all kinds of data layers, hundreds and hundreds of data layers. So I can dig into the history of a land, trying to figure out what happened. What happened, guys? Does anybody know? And what could we do? This is what I come out and I see. And I don't know. I really don't. I mean, I think that the lawn maybe wasn't the best choice, but you can see there's utilities. So as a contractor, does anyone have a go-to solution they would do for this? I don't know. I don't know either. I'd be like, let's call somebody. So call us. I feel like that might need a little bit of help. So start by referring the landowner to our visit. We can set up a virtual project review. We can have different agencies out. I can coordinate the DNR to come out for you. We can do a design. You guys can do the design. And so I'd like to say that the most basic design is a plant list, a list of plants, and a quantity. So if you guys can come up with that, you can apply for one of the grants. So that's something where we can work together. We can also provide O&M plans for you. We can help develop invasive plants. If you have something out there and you don't know what it is, we have excellent like botanists and invasive species folks that can come out and talk about all the different species that we're doing battle with right now. And I think that's pretty valuable. That's actually after the fact. When you're done with the project, you can say, you know, you can always call the WCD to come out and help maintain your project. This is an example plan. There's a handout of it over there. We just would need to see a list of plants and quantities. And if you want, you can throw in a diagram, but it doesn't have to be much. This is a detail. If you wanted to do something that's already created, you could use this to kind of show what you're up to. This is a core log. We provide handouts like this to talk about help a landowner who's doing DIY. So if you have a landowner who's kind of doing the project themselves, we can help them do it. Or if you are a landowner, call and we can help you do it. So this is just talking about the different components and how to take care of the project before, after, and during. We give maintenance plans. Maintenance is critical for all of the success of these projects. So don't leave that to the last. We try to get that in front of the clients early. So I'm going to talk about Carnelian-Marine-St. Croix Watershed District because that's where we are right now. They have launched a very exciting new program recently. It's for shorelines. There's a shoreline plant grant, $750. If you spend 1,000, so you get, it's a 25% cost share. So basically, if you could get one of your clients to sign up, all you got to do is say, you know, put in a couple shrubs, put in a couple trees, you can get it covered. You know, we'll do the other part, but you know, you just, it seems like every project could use a couple shrubs. So then there's a larger grant that goes all the way up to, you know, 10,000 or more. So that would be more for larger projects that go through a design. So they are looking at water quality. All of these different watersheds are looking at water quality. So you will be ranked, your projects, if they're bigger, will be ranked on, is this an important water body? Is it going to actually make a difference to lake quality? Is it demonstration or education? So say you guys want to try out something cool and different, you're at a park or you're working with a landowner association, you can do something really demonstrative. You can get higher and higher grants for that kind of work. And there's maps to tell you which lakes are impaired. So basically what I want to say is I'm here to help. I respect you guys. Contractors are amazing. we're here to kind of open a dialogue. So I think the WCD is a good venue to try and talk to contractors, find out what's going on with you guys, what you're seeing on your end. Really try and make these processes more straightforward, try and get your ideas of what's working. So we hope to have some more of this kind of interactive dialogue. But the main thing is if you're doing a project, check in early. These grants are reimbursement and you have to be approved before you spend it. So don't do the project and then apply. Again, just a list, quantities, and the board meets monthly. So coming up here April 4th, say you have met with a landowner who wants to do it, you can pop in the grant and it would be approved to move forward in May. But yeah, in this case, I would advise you to go directly to the Watershed District. On their website, they have a button and you can sign up right away to get that. Yeah, so qualifying expenses, the cool thing about these grants is they cover some contractor time, they cover landowner time, they cover a lot of different materials, but yes, the detailed design too, like we could get very detailed designs. I would say in these projects, we often find that upland work is necessary. It's part of what's causing the problem. So, you know, we'll come on a landowner, they'll have a big rut and we'll just say, hey, that's coming from up there. So let's put in a rain garden or a depression. And so those kind of projects go hand in hand and there's funding on a level for all of that. So it's basically out there. So we can help put those together for you. This is an example of just showing where the riprap is. In this case, the riprap's remaining and you're putting a buffer in. This is the most basic like type, and it shows the different grants at the bottom. Like if you did a district cost share, it could be 10,000, potential award 50% or 25%. It all depends on the grant, the watershed district. These are all the different watershed districts that we've worked with. But yeah, just basically putting in some different designs. This one I suppose is what Tom talked about. So there's those backer boulders and a core log, and it basically is staggered. And the idea is the ice kind of pushes up and will break. It will kind of work with the ice like weakness and have it break on its own weight. Plans are very simple, just a circle and a line. It's great. Just say this is where the project is. I've worked with contractors where they overlaid their notes on my concept plan, and that's awesome. You can do your own plans. So yeah, just remembering this is a reimbursement grant. After it's done, you need to have final reports. We'll come out and check out the site. The most important thing is that you document expenses. They're going to see a list. This is not for the plant grant, by the way. This is if you get that larger grant, you'll need a list of expenses and like when the work happened. We can send you an example of that. And then to tell your clients that they do need to keep these in place. So it's not just plant it, then dig it up and then use it in your next project. So there will be inspections especially for the bigger projects. Rice Creek, Molly's here from Rice Creek. It's got her own program and they just increased theirs to 10,000. So they have a much larger grant too. So just have us come out. We can walk you through what their process is, which is different to get the different grants. But the mini grant's $500. You write a sentence, pop it on our website. Any project you're working, any landowner in the Rice Creek area, this goes across county. So it goes all the way down. So in any of this area, there's grants. So say $500, I bet every client could use a little shopping trip to the nursery. So that's what that's there for. Valley Branch, brand new Shoreline partnership program. It's 75% up to 10 grand as well. They have all of those watersheds, and then community grants go way high for that too. So this is Hells Creek. All of these streams are very high quality or high priority. So streams too, guys, if you have any streams, you can get funding for stabilizing those banks. Comfort Lake just launched a big one, 8,000. And then I think they have 1,000 available. So this is where we are, Forest Lake. Okay, Ramsey, Washington, all the way up to 100,000. This is more for the Shoreline 15, 100% covered. So, hey guys, you know, depending on where you are, pay attention. These things are out there. South Wash, Middle St. Croix. We have other funding, buffer law funding coming down to help. Anyway, funding guys, call us. Bioengineering is what we're here to talk about a little bit too. So this is what we'd like to fund. It's basically using vegetation and the tools of biology to stabilize the shoreline. Upland buffers, clearly the easiest. You can use it on upland areas pretty much any time. So it's really good at it's effective at stopping surface runoff from above. It stabilizes the soil. It can infiltrate up to 9 inches an hour. It's a good kind of machine. Doesn't do quite as well with wake, you know, so this would be only acceptable for lower velocity areas, but those roots really go down. And as they were saying, this really helps to stabilize. Native plants, letting the emergence out there will help to slow the force to acting as a bit of a wave break. Tons of good plants out there. This would be for the upland zone. As you get into the shade, there's lots of plants for shades. We have lists on everything. Good transitional zone plants, the ones that can handle really that like flooding. So all we're doing is looking for plants that can handle that seasonal flooding that naturally occurs. So anything you see kind of along shoreline, that's going to be great. So these have to be 100% Minnesota natives, no cultivars. Aquatic plants too, but yeah, you can start to see how this might be a bit of a machine for helping to stabilize. Just quickly, the soft armor versus hard armor. In the past, we've done hard armor. That's riprap and concrete, and we've channelized everything. This helps stabilize properties to a degree, but it really does prevent wildlife from moving, and it can deflect erosion to other areas. So especially on the stream bank, you'll just see that velocity cause the next problem down the way. Whereas soft armor, you're using the plant roots as key, and you can do both. So that's what I'm excited about with this, is you can certainly do hard armor with the soft armor. So this is an example of concrete. You can see this wall. Animals kind of hit that, and they're not able to make it up to their upland habitats. So I'll just briefly touch on a lot of these different techniques: live staking, core rolls, native planting. So benefits of bioengineering, they're resilient. So while hard armor can move and reposition itself and be difficult to deal with later, if these get thrashed, they can resprout. They're pretty tough. They provide all that great benefits for wildlife and water quality. And then they can be as simple as taking a cutting, say from a willow, shove it in the ground, you get another one. Disadvantages, they take time to establish. So it takes a lot of time. You have to get over that kind of initial hump, like, hey guys, this is going to take a couple years if it's seeded till it start looking good. A shrub will look good right away, but they're weakest at the installation point. So once we start to install, they're very vulnerable. So that's when you really need to make sure you're thinking about timing, getting things covered. There are certain times that only cuttings can be installed, like just a very small window for bare root and for cuttings. And then maintenance is a bit different, especially for landowners that don't know all their plants, or contractors that don't know all their plants. So there is that kind of learning curve. So those are some of the challenges. Solutions. So this is probably my favorite one. So it's a boulder toe. And you can use it with just about all of the other techniques. So boulder toes are for moderate to high energy sites. Rock can be layered at the toe, and it provides immediate protection for the plantings. You do want to key it in. So this is an example of how deeply you can put the boulders in to really try and get that toe established. The ones that we've been putting in kind of have those backer boulders. and then bring in some fill. Again, marking that ordinary high water line, so critical, making sure that you got your permits and you're not going to be just jumping on this without checking. So the toe still does need permit. And this kind of shows the layout of the staggered boulders and then planting the whole area. And these are handouts you can take. So this was talking about how the ice is weak in tension. And so we tried to design a project that will self-destruct, try and break the ice. And so it will deflect upwards and then it will break under its own weight is the idea. And I love these drawings, but it starts to show that you can use it to absorb the wave energy on a 1 to 2 slope. Solutions like live staking, this is one that's very inexpensive. If you guys know a site that has dogwoods, you just can cut it and you can hammer them in. So it works really well on eroding and steep sites. So this would be a great one where it's just vertical, like that one we saw. Like you could get some live stakes in there at the beginning. Willows, dogwoods, stowberries, there's a list of about 20 species that you could do this with. There's just a little bit about the angle of the cut and just making sure that you have it deep down into the water table, trying to get it in pretty deep, and 75 to 90% survival rate. So that's pretty great for the cost, especially. A little bit more on installation. So yeah, rooting hormone, that's another thing to kind of think about. All of these are all available online, tons and tons of information. This is a different one. It's using them as kind of bundles. And so you'll also get a ton of revegetation, but at the same time, you're starting to get immediate stabilization and helping with that grade. So if you do need to pull it back, you start putting these in and it helps you get that 3 to 1 slope. You dig it on contour and put them in every couple feet. Biologs are very common these days. These are really good for the low moderate energy sites as well. But you can use it in combination of all of these other types of practices to strengthen it. Like you can add the live staking with the core log and just add them in to make it pretty strong. This is the core above the toe boulders. It's showing the notch, and then you tie them together and you make sure that they're really in there and staked deep so it doesn't move. That's kind of the trick for these. You can tier them, so that starts to get that 3 to 1 where you can push it out just a little bit. It was on very steep slopes. This shows the kind of the 2, so that acts almost like a wave break. You can plant right into these 2. Let's see, biolog can be right at a cut slope, or it can be out from it. More of to help these plants establish. This is an example. And then they put in the erosion control blanket and planting a year later. This one's pretty fun. This is where you actually start bringing in a little bit of soil and encapsulating it with erosion control. So this one is often used when sloping back towards the shore is not an option. And so it lets you kind of push forward. So roadways or other infrastructure, that might be a good solution to try and reclaim a little bit of that. Again, permits may be necessary, there's fill coming in, but certainly preferable to giant double retaining walls from a DNR perspective. Yeah, so this is a little cross section of that. So you can see you can shove in live stakes. You can do the toe rock if you want, using them all together to make it kind of more of a machine. So yeah, you're kind of fill, and then you can seed it. All of these get seeded before the blanket. So you put the seed and then you wrap, and then you can cut right in and shove the plugs in. Reinforced. This is starting to get even a little fancier. So this is live cuttings like shoved into the soil lifts. Similar to the other one. And vegetated geotextile. You can see that really, this is all going to be vegetated without any shrubs purchased. And this can literally, this can just be cut and you don't have to purchase the materials. I did want to say that the preserving and enhancing is huge. So when I go out on sites, I do like to tell people that preservation's the cheapest. And if you have something good to identify it and point it out, I like to add natural elements, if anything. A lot of people are all excited for fish habitat. They live there because they love to fish. So we've had loafing logs go in where you anchor them into the lake, and these can actually get funded by grants. And they do help to stabilize. You can do a lot of work. Still, permits may be necessary, but a lot of time there's a partnership in the watershed district will come out, put it in, and help pay for it. The logs. Also, I guess I don't know if I'm going to have a slide about this, but ice ridges in general, they're historic. And so the best thing to do is often to leave them. It's a hard sell. But what happens when that ice ridge is formed is it starts to solidify the bank. And then as water's coming from the upland, it has a chance to slow down and settle in. And so in a way, that's basically what the lake wants to do, is going to do it on its own. As you're out fishing or going around, take a look at the edge of the shores in native that's what's happening to the lake just naturally. So it's part of it. Understanding what the lake wants to do and where it wants to be is a big part. So if you can sell that to your client, leaving even a part of the ice ridge will help, and it's, I know it can reduce costs, but it also long-term, if they're willing to bulldoze this every year, then that's fine. But if they want to give up the fight, that's fine too. They can just give up the fight. So I was trying to tell you guys at the beginning, we really need help spreading the words about this, about all these grants. They're new, nobody knows about them. We need to get plants on the banks of all of our lakes and streams, and it's free, $500, so easy. So if you want to just add a little kick selling point to your clients, you don't have to do a thing. Have them call us. If you want to propose a project, send it to us. I can take a look. All of these are options, and I think we're all here to assist you. So yes, regulations are complex and crazy, but in general, that's everybody just wants to get plants on the side, and everyone will help you with that. So I think, are we on time? Okay, so I just wanted to run through a couple things that I've seen out there. So exposed soil, this is one we come across a lot. This is construction, leaving behind a big muddy mess. The lawn and geese. So I don't know what you guys think a good solution here would be. To me, it seems like it would be great for simple native plantings. You could come in, cut up the sod, remove it, put in some seed, and call it a day, and maybe get some of the east deterrent out of the way. So here's one. What do you guys want to do here? So this is the one where there's a lot of mud. There's a lot of mud and crud in here. So if you push that into the lake this spring, that's not exactly the best approach. So get some approvals, make sure it's okay. And I would take a lot of this off and put it up site, like on the site elsewhere. And then think about regrading that using some of those techniques that might be able to get it back. It depends on how far you can pull it back. If the structure's here, you may be looking at doing some of those extra tiers to try and get that slope. Yeah, it's just me. I would love to hear 100 ideas from contractors. I don't know. That's everyone's got a different perspective on what's going to work. Now let's see. So this one, this is saying that if you cut down all of the trees, and suddenly you may not have an armored shore. The graded shorelines, this happens at parks a lot. It's in Dakota County. This is, very simple. Put in the core log, put in the blanket. And then fencing, guys, for everything, recommend the fencing. And some of that can be covered with the grant too. So ta-da, questions. Thank you again. So the national funding's on pause. We have our CCP funding coming down. It's going to be millions that would come down to help farmers with their ag lands, is to help stabilize shorelines, forest restoration, lots and lots of projects. Basically anything good you can think of is that's on pause, but when we get that, we're gearing up and so excited to, and that's something we'll do a follow-up workshop on. So yeah, but we are diversified. Washington County is very diversified. We have fundings. We're partners with all of our great watershed districts. We have contracts with the county. We are leveraging from nonprofits. We are bringing in state funds from the Board of Soil and Water Resources. Jay Riggs is our district manager, and he has just said, like, you know, we're not putting all of our eggs in one basket. We're really trying to build partnerships. And there's 5 designers at our office and about 20 other staff. We have a BMP staff. We have a lot of different folks, but this is, again, we can't do it all. We need contractors. We need help. So it'd be nice if I didn't have to do all the design.
I'm just here with the microphone if anybody else has questions.
I know funding can be pretty variable from year to year, but are there any like consistent cutoff deadlines that landowners should be aware of consistent, predictable times that they need to apply for certain programs?
For sure. Yeah. So on everybody's website, they'll have really great outlines of when that is. It's typically their board meeting. So it's every month. There are a couple grants that are approved immediately. Like you just tell them, especially in Ramsey, you just say, hey, we're doing this, and they can say it's under $5 grand, go for it. Yeah, but otherwise.
Maybe I'll just answer from my perspective is the district has a cost share program that is underutilized every year. So until we hit a threshold where we get enough applications, we don't have certain deadlines in that. So it's there.
Tomorrow. It does go to your board though, right?
Yes, the approval process needs to go to a board just in terms of reviewing, but in terms of, I know some other watersheds, like they have a set cap, like everybody budgets for a certain amount. Some areas and certain types of programs, they max out early and often, so then they get more prescriptive with submittal timelines, deadlines and that. But some of the shoreline stuff, at least out in this way, it's an underutilized resource, so.
Are we good?
I might just want to, excuse me, I might just want to add to that. Some of those smaller grants, like the $500, $750 grants, those ones go very quickly. So it's really encouraged to apply to those early in the year, especially before like the spring and the summer when all the work's taking place. So just a little FYI on those ones, they go fast.
That's Race Creek. So also a really huge area, probably where you're familiar working. But again, they do have water quality grants, and those are monthly. So are you excited? Are you all going to pitch this for us? Come on. We have packets. So I have packets I bring out, super professional, to every site, and I give everyone the handouts and I talk them through whatever they're interested in. So you can pick up the packets and take them too.
Good morning. My name is Dick Bohr. I live on Big Marine Lake. Years ago, when I was on the watershed, they had what they called a BMP, Best Management Practices.
That's still hip.
I don't know of a one that ever took on Big Marine Lake. Carnelian Lake, I think they had a few that survived that. For an example, the Girl Scout camp wanted to move their beach, so they put in on the southeast side, they put in that best management practice area. A couple of years later, the ice took it all out. So
This is such a common tale.
and that's all through ice heave business. That's what it. I don't know if that was a 50-50 match grant, or did Soil and Water pay for the whole thing? I don't know that anymore. Thank you.
Yeah, good comment for sure. There is no way to guarantee these are gonna stay. And so that is part of why the lawyer is here, to talk about some of the things we can do to make sure we build in clauses and that sort of thing to cover. Because certainly, as I was saying, the lake's gonna do what it wants to do. And you might have 5, 10, 20 years where nothing happens but you know, if I looked back, I think it was 2005, there's articles about huge heaves in Chisago, and then 2015, another press, you know, flurry of them. So it happens, and it's, you know, we can try and say these are more resilient. We can say they're better for the ecology. There's so many other reasons they're great. So we just try to do our best. And demonstration projects, guys, if you guys want to try something new and exciting, that would be awesome. So try a new technology that's out there. We switch.
Hi, everybody. My name is Mike Welch. I am an attorney at Smith Partners down, we have offices in downtown Minneapolis. And it was not my idea to have the lawyer go last, you know. And I got like slides with words on them and stuff after these guys show, you know, cool plants and fun stuff and neat things. That would be swell.
Ha. Yeah.
And I'm sorry to come at you.
There we go.
And the best news I have for you is this is going to be really short. And we're not going to property law 101 first year property law class here today. We're just going to go over a couple of high points and maybe take some questions and stuff like that. Let's see, what else should we do by way of background? So our practice is almost entirely and my practice is almost entirely focused on water protection and water resource and flood risk mitigation law. So we work with a lot of watershed organizations and statewide organizations on that, both here in the Twin Cities area and around the Twin Cities area and up in the Red River Valley. In fact, one of my colleagues is up meeting with the Red River Board this morning. We also do some nonprofit work and consult with the state agency, the Board of Water and Soil Resources, which is probably a name you've heard a lot of times already this morning, and to some degree DNR and some of the other agencies on water resource protection law. So I'm going to just kind of talk a little bit about some stuff that I think is probably going to have a little bit of overlap with some of the things that you heard this morning. So I'm going to hit it quickly and move on and just give you a flavor for how to stay on the right side of the law, which is always a good idea. One background issue that I just made note of as while Lori was talking is there's an interesting conundrum specifically with shoreline and stream bank protection and regulation thereof. Because you see some of these really degraded shorelines, you know, that's a problem. You know, you have active pollution into the lake, you have risk of more. The watershed organizations, DNR, all the way up to the Corps of Engineers, nobody wants that. At the same time, they're regulating how you fix it. So, and in some cases, this cost share support for this kind of work is in place because we want these shorelines to be stable and not to be contributing soil and associated pollutants into the water resources. at the same time, there is a regulatory framework that applies. So you have to do it in a particular way. And we do get people sometimes who say, you know, I'm not going to hire an engineer. I'm not going to hire a contractor who has the background to do this. I'll just leave it because I'm not doing this. This is, you know, natural conditions or ice or what have you. So it's an area where this local contact and the fact that all the folks here from the watershed districts in the area, soil and water conservation districts, a hands-on approach is a really good idea. And getting in there and meeting with them or contacting them early in the process really helps you sort of thread that needle between achieving a stabilization that stops a problem at the same time you're doing it in compliance with the law. So that having been said, we'll talk about some of the complexities. One of them, of course, is when you're doing shoreline stream bank stabilization work, and I am talking about both, not just lakes. This goes for creeks and water courses of all different kinds as well. You very likely will need a permit. And the critical factor there, which I'm sure you've heard about already a fair bit, and you're probably well aware, is whether or not you're above or below the ordinary high water level. And easier said than done, right? Because sometimes nobody knows exactly where that is. So again, working with staff is really helpful. USACE, I'm sorry, stupid acronyms, the Army Corps of Engineers. Very, very rarely engaged in Minnesota in any of this kind of work. Do they have jurisdiction? Technically, yes, depending on what water body you're on. Their jurisdiction is also a function of political wrangling. And this language I put here underneath waters of the United States is we've over the last 30 years, what that definition applies to has been getting whipsawed back and forth with court cases that you may have heard about that have gone up to the Supreme Court many times. DNR is going to have jurisdiction, Department of Natural Resources, of course, when you're on a public water, either a public water course or a public lake. And generally those are defined, and generally your watershed, your local watershed people know where they are and which ones they are. Then finally, at the nearest and dearest level is you have your county, city, and watershed organizations, which would include both watershed districts, which are an entity that can be formed anywhere in the state, and then watershed management organizations, which are just in the 7-county metro area. We've added to that array with organizations that, like the one I'm sure you've heard about today, like the Lower St. Croix watershed organization, which is coming about through the Board of Water and Soil Resources effort to get a watershed plan in place everywhere in the state. And they're actually making really remarkable progress in fairly short order on all of that. So I'm going to focus mostly on the locals and how they relate to you and the work that you're doing, because, you know, DNR is just strapped. And almost anytime I have a conversation about, you know, do you want to take this penalty shot or should we, they almost always defer to the locals. In some cases with some of the watershed organizations, and this is worth inquiring about when you are going to have to get a permit, you might want to inquire about a general permit, which some of the watershed, Tom, do you guys at Carnelian have a DNR general permit? Through the conservation district? Well, that's interesting. So what a general permit does is say, for this kind of work, and very often these general permits from the state include shoreline and stream bank stabilization. If you follow the local ordinance and the local regulations, you get a permit from the local entity, a watershed district, or maybe the county, you get the DNR approval comes along with it, which is very handy. So there is an effort to sort of streamline this and to not have contractors especially have to deal with so many different jurisdictions, you know, and make some efficiency in that process. And those are worth inquiring about, as I say. Yeah, I think that's about where I'll leave it for all of that. With regard to what kind of jurisdiction, what kind of work might be regulated, that is an interesting question. I guess I should go back up to the top. The state and the Department of Natural Resources establish shoreline use requirements, and you'll see about this kind of stuff in the news when somebody wants to build too close to a bluff. Those are entirely administered through the local land use authority. So in most cases, that's going to be a city if you're in a city, or the county. And to be clear, that's not really what I'm talking about today. That is about what you can build on a piece of property and how close it can be to the water. That whole, which has to do with establishing, you know, a business or a residence or whatever the case may be, an accessory building on a property. So that's a zoning and land use function. What we're talking about today is actually the regulatory framework that applies when you're actually trying to stabilize a shoreline or a stream bank. So that's kind of critical. Counties can, but very few do license shoreline contractors. And so you would probably want to check that if you're here and you don't know that. And my guess is you know that already or not, whether you need a license from the county. Watershed organizations cannot license. It is outside of their jurisdictional authority. Cities could as well. I don't know any that do. Oh, for what that's worth. This is sort of a side note for this part of it. I perceive that this is the contractor side of the room and this is the property owner room. But for contractors, you know, and maybe Tom and some of the others talked about this morning, that, you know, watersheds also, it's very much in their interest, watershed organizations, to have stabilization projects. And, you know, Barbara Heitkamp is working with the watershed, the larger watershed affiliated group. They want these shorelines stabilized. So they're very often going to identify projects where they want to go in and stabilize. And it might even be on private land, and they will pay for it. So as a contractor, it may make business sense, in addition to not running afoul of the law, but to establish a reputation as a very strong contractor who's diligent and responsible, because you might get some nice projects out of the deal. In fact, in the list of those who are in attendance today, I saw one with whom we have worked on a project, wasn't a shoreline project, but it was a project. So that's a side consideration and sort of hopefully a business case for staying on the right side of the local law with regard to this. The other critical consideration here in designing your shoreline stabilizations is something that's becoming increasingly critical, is floodplain management, and not increasing any risk of high water to any properties that are, you know, residents, even accessory structures that are within the 100-year floodplain. And as you all know better than I do, in the real world, the 100-year floodplain is going up and up and up, getting higher in elevation. So that is another element where you may need to get right with the watershed organization and get a permit, or the county. You can, again, I feel like I'm probably echoing earlier comments, you can avoid compliance issues by inquiring very early and confirming compliance with applicable regulatory requirements early. One of the key things to do is determine your requirement, whether you're triggering a permit requirement, and that has to do with the location on a lake or a stream, the linear extent of stabilization, how you know, what the actual footage of shoreline you're trying to stabilize. Once you're in and you need a permit from the local entity, then the criteria that you need to meet kick in, and those are all going to go to design. I'm just curious, are there any folks here who are actually engineers, registered engineers in the state, who do design of shoreline stream bank stabilizations? Yeah. So that's always a tricky balance, because the watershed technical reviewers almost always are engineers. And so they're going to work with you to try to get a design that meets their criteria. But it may involve a little more math and a little more, scale drawings than you might normally do. But very often you'll get some help that may come at a cost. The general priority, again, I think is probably a theme you've heard today of those criteria is naturalized shorelines whenever possible. And the more natural, the better. So even if you're doing riprap, they're going to want to see vegetation in there. And a straight up riprap shoreline is all the watershed organizations are disfavor those. I guess I did have a slide. This is where all the watershed organizations are in the state. So I don't know how far and wide people are going here with their work, but in the places that are not colored, the blue color, there is no watershed organization. There is not one in every part of the state. In the metro area and the metro counties, 7 county metro areas, there must be one. State law requires that there be a watershed organization. So here you see much denser coverage. This is a little deceiving because these are the watershed districts. For all the white area in those counties, those are covered by watershed management organizations. At this hour of the day, I certainly will not get into the distinctions between the two, but they both have regulatory jurisdiction over shoreline stream bank stabilizations. As I mentioned, the priority tends to be on naturalized shorelines, and the other end of the spectrum is retaining walls. You're going to be really, really hard pressed to get regulatory approval for a retaining wall because there's almost no circumstances in which they want those. Specifically with regard to watershed organizations and those local entities, these are the sort of can and cannot do's. So basically they do permitting. They can issue compliance orders. I don't like to call them stop work orders because if you're stabilizing a shoreline, we don't want you to stop working. We want the shoreline stabilized, but you may need to rejigger your design if you run into a problem. They can and very often do under a permit if they do not approve the work, if the work does not meet the plans, the watershed organization can come in and fix it and charge you for it. Then on this side is a bunch of like what passes for humor of a lawyer about things that you can't do. So generally you don't have to worry about punch fighting. I don't know, Tom, do you do much punch fighting? Not too much, a little bit. I wouldn't mess with him. And then finally, and I should have said it at the outset, this is general legal advice. I'm not advising anybody on any specific topic. You got to get your own legal advice when you're conducting your business or stabilizing your property. And I'm just here with some sort of general outlines on things. So with that, that having been said, we can take some questions. I guess the one other thing, general thing that I should keep in mind, of course, keep the buffer law in mind. I think there was some discussion of that, 50-foot buffer on water. So you can't, you need to maintain those buffers in place, though there's exceptions to that. Another sort of overall point is one of the things about the rules that the watershed organizations are imposing is they generally overlap with your client interests. So they're going to be consistent for the most part. And I say that from my perspective, you may have a different perspective. But for example, sand blankets, laying a sand, doing a beach on a thing. Well, the watershed doesn't want you to have contaminated sand on your property line, and neither does the client. So, I think a lot of the stuff that the watersheds ask for is not super crazy or out of bounds. Tom's here with his
I'm here to play
old
Vanna White.
school
So
microphone
any
style.
questions?
Gene Rayburn. And ask anybody, right?
When it comes to watersheds and not being able to issue citations, how is that enforced? Where does the enforcement come from? if they can't issue a citation, what do they do? What can a customer who says, I don't care, I don't want to permit this thing, I'm going to go ahead and do my own thing. And the watershed shed comes in and says, you can't do that. How do they enforce that? How do they legally step into that? And I was hoping you kind of talk a little bit about that, especially for the homeowners, as if they start dipping their feet into doing things on their own, what the ramifications are beyond just, here's $100 fine. Well, if the watershed doesn't issue fines, they're just going to go, I like what I did.
That's
So
always,
maybe you could just address that a little bit.
that's always a tough place to be, is driving away from a property on your truck going like, well, this isn't going to go well. The watershed organizations can issue, a lot of times they will have a process, escalating enforcement process that can ultimately and almost never does result in either civil enforcement action in civil court or criminal enforcement action. If it's criminal, it has to go to the county attorney, and the county attorney will enforce it. But watershed organizations have their rules. If a property owner is not in compliance with those rules with regard to shoreline stream bank, the watershed inspector gets wind of it, comes out, takes a look, can issue an order that basically says you have to fix it right now, can also tell you that you need to appear before the board of managers of the watershed organization for an enforcement hearing and a compliance hearing. The board of managers can issue a findings of fact, conclusions of law, and an order that directs what you must do and how you must repair your property. Very often that will include recouping costs that have incurred in taking the enforcement action. Once the board of managers, which is the governing board of the watershed body, makes that order, if the property owner does not, and I want to be clear, those orders are issued to the property owner. So the contractor is going to be an interface, but the property owner is going to be the ultimately responsible entity. And those orders can be taken to district court and enforced. And in one case, I've been practicing now for 20 years, I have actually gone to the district court, had somebody who just really, really did not want to comply, and they ended up with a lien on their property, and a project that would have cost the guy maybe $25,000 to fix in the first place cost him damn near $100,000. That's really rare. That's really rare. Most of the time you'll come out and you'll go, hey, look, this is what we need. We don't want to spend any, more time on this than you do.
Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer. If you haven't gathered that, I'm not even. So take this as my experience has been. I will try to do everything to help you voluntarily comply with what the requirements are. I, as a staff member, cannot approve anything that does not meet regulations. And then, as I alluded to, when you're likely working on a shoreline, you're not just working within a watershed jurisdiction, you're working within usually a municipality and DNR. And some of the things that Michael was outlining, they do have the misdemeanors, the fines, the fees. They have their own mechanisms. So usually part of a watershed district's escalated enforcement is a joint process with partners. So I think that's why, in large part, as his great example, to comply is a lot cheaper in the end than to fight. And our goal is that voluntary compliance.
That's a really good point, Tom. Because of the overlapping jurisdictions, very often, especially if you're in a public waters wetland at all, DNR will get involved, and they do have guys with guns and, the full on deal, and we will get them involved. I've got a deal down in Carver County right now where the property owner decided they were going to just run a ditch right through this wetland, and DNR, we did all the legwork. My client did all the legwork on the ground, but ultimately DNR put a lien on the property, and they're trying to sell it, and they've got they're in a bad spot. So once that went into place, they started cooperating quite a bit more than they had before. But that's a great point. Yeah, usually with public waters, especially, we'll get DNR involved, or any wetlands, even a Wetland Conservation Act wetland. Everybody's ready for lunch. Well,
Yeah, so specific examples, public entities actually have to go through a permitting process and if the county installed something much, it would be actually be considered a beach. Again, legal terms, legal jargon, there's a process and a permitting process that they have to go through. You as an individual landowner have the ability to put in what's considered a sand blanket. Won't get into the specifications of that. If you want to exceed what the requirements are, that again, there's usually a list of parameters and criteria that say you can do this type of activity with simple notification. You don't have to do permitting. You don't have to do plan designs. You don't have to do all the engineering work. As long as you as the landowner are taking responsibility for implementing these things, if you want to deviate and do more or activities that are outlined, that's where you need to contact somebody to go through a permitting process. So in the case of this, like I said, a beach is public beach on a big piece of property is a much different thing that has to go through permitting with DNR and all of that. So I can't speak to the nuances of the specific case because I wasn't here and I'm not privy to it, but just some of the high level differences in terms of it. Again, sometimes people's perception as a permitting process means no, and that's not the case. The permitting process is there, as Michael pointed out, is to make sure that the way it goes in isn't going to lead to further problems. And it's usually once you hit thresholds, then notification and that permitting process kicks in. And sometimes that permitting process is swift and easy. Complex sites or problematic sites or very unique sites, sometimes it's the challenge. I'll say, I've been on sites and it's a 20-foot slope like this and the person's like, I want to put in a sand blanket. And one of the criteria is it's got to be put on a non-steep slope. There's nothing like, well, can I excavate everything and then it's like, nope, we can't keep like compounding the thing. It's like at the end of the day, the property just isn't suited for sand. Again, hypotheticals, nuances, really challenging from a rule perspective to play that game, but just trying to touch on that. Yep. Yep. And yeah, sometimes I like to just tell people, like, think of if you're building a new home, you have to build things to plumbing code, electric code, sometimes windows and all these things where that's an industry where permitting is part of the process. It's more standardized. I would love if zoning, grading, land alteration started to move that direction with comfort. If anything, again, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an engineer. I am a middleman between my board's rules and helping landowners, contractors navigate not just my manager's rules, but local in a way that it's a lot to encumber, but my goal is to help navigate all these processes in different groups. So I know that's not always the case. And sometimes I come out and say it doesn't meet the rules. Yeah.
I agree with everything Tom said.
Dick Bohr again from Big Marine Lake. My question is, probably involves the watershed, the DNR and soil and water. Do we need a permit this year to push it back to where it started from? Our land, without adding any bushes or?
Yeah, if you follow that guideline thing that I shared in my presentation of you can push the sand and gravel back, you can't push the topsoil, you're not more than 200 feet. You meet all those criteria, you do not need to permit, but you need to notify. And we'll send it out again. There was a quick link. It was a tiny URL, 2025 IC. If you fill that out, that is your notification to the DNR, the watershed, and in your case, the city of Scandia, and you will be able to proceed with that simple filling that out. Again, we're trying to streamline. We've heard from a lot of people, "Oh, I don't want to contact 3 to 4 different entities. Can't I just contact one?" So the Watershed District has taken that on as like, if you notify us through this quick online form, we will share that with everybody else who needs to be notified on your behalf. So again, working within the rules, but we understand processes. Usually, process doesn't usually require rule change. It often just leads to what is often a landowner frustration. So this is that perfect example. We hear you. I don't want to pick up the phone to talk to Kyle Morrell, Tom Langer, Dan Scollin at DNR. It's like, why? Noted. Heard it. So a simple form. You don't even have to call me. Some people like, no, you're scary. I don't want to talk to you. I don't like you. Whatever it is. It's like, great. You can do it online. And if you don't like me and you're having trouble, you could contact Lori. You could contact anybody. And I've notified everybody. It's like, we can all help you fill out the form. Or you could call me. I'll type out the form for you. So. Nope. You could do just that. So I plan on following up with people because I want to provide some of the cross sections. So if you have a homeowner, you're saying, I want to go back to riprap shoreline, we'll send you that little templated thing just again. So we want to help you. We want to help document things and give you comfort so that you can just turn. I'm going to do the half the room split again. This half of the room can turn to this half of the room and say, can you help me with this? My advice to this half of the room is go, have you guys submitted anything? Or are you going to meet the criteria? And it's a quick conversation that, yeah, yes.
So then you know who else is in
Yep. Otherwise, if you stick around long enough and raise both hands, I'll encourage this half of the room to go talk to that half of the room.
I put my contact information up here for what it's worth. If you have follow-up questions, I'm glad to field them to in limited extent. And then I have business cards, old school, if anybody wants those.